in the heart of a cold, unforgiving Russian winter, there lived a shoemaker named Simon. He was a man of simple means, neither owning a house nor a patch of land to call his own. Simon's world was a modest peasant's hut, shared with his wife and their children, where every day was a battle against hunger and the biting chill that crept through the cracks in the walls. His hands, rough and calloused from years of labor, earned just enough to keep bread on the table, but never enough to lift his family out of want. Work was plentiful, but the pay was meager, and the price of bread seemed to rise with every passing season. The family's only protection against the winter's cruelty was a single sheepskin coat, so worn and tattered that it barely held together, and even this they had to share, taking turns to brave the cold. For 2 years, Simon had dreamed of buying new sheepskins to make a proper coat before the next frost set in. He had managed to save a crumpled 3-ruble note hidden away in his wife's box, and a handful of coins owed to him by villagers for mended boots and patched shoes. On a morning heavy with frost, Simon decided the time had come. He dressed in layers, pulling on his wife's quilted jacket beneath his own threadbare coat, and tucked the precious note into his pocket. With a sturdy stick in hand, he set out for the village, determined to collect his debts, and finally purchase the sheepskins that would shield his family from the cold. But the world had other plans. The first house he visited offered only promises, the second, excuses and a few small coins. The dealer, wary of Simon's poverty, refused to sell on credit. Disheartened, Simon spent the little he had on a drink to warm his bones, and began the long walk home, empty-handed and heavy-hearted. As the sun dipped low and the frost deepened, Simon trudged along the lonely road, unaware that his journey would soon take a turn that would test the very core of his humanity. The road home was long and silent, the kind of silence that presses in on a man's thoughts and makes every step feel heavier than the last. Simon's boots crunched over the frozen earth, each stride a reminder of the emptiness in his pockets and the weight of disappointment he carried. The sky above was a dull leaden gray, and the sun, already low, cast a pale, indifferent light over the fields. Simon's breath hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of wood smoke drifting from distant chimneys. He tried to focus on the rhythm of his walking, the steady tap of his stick against the ground, but his mind kept circling back to the day's failures, the debts uncollected, the sheepskins still out of reach, the cold that would soon seep through the walls of his home. He muttered to himself, half in frustration, half in resignation. What good is a man's work if it never brings enough? What use is hope when the world gives nothing in return? The words vanished into the wind, unheard by anyone but Simon and the crows perched on the bare branches overhead. He thought of his wife Matrona, waiting at home, her face lined with worry, her hands always busy with some small task to keep the family going. He thought of the children, their thin arms and bright eyes, and the way they huddled together for warmth at night. The guilt gnawed at him. He had set out to provide, and now he would return with nothing but empty hands and a heavier heart. As he neared the bend in the road, Simon's thoughts were interrupted by a strange sight. There, behind the old stone shrine that marked the crossroads, something pale and motionless caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be a sack of flour or a bundle of rags left by a careless traveler. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into the unmistakable form of a man, naked, shivering, and slumped against the cold stone. Simon's heart lurched. He stopped, uncertain, his instincts warring with his conscience. The world was full of dangers, and a man alone on the road could not afford to be careless. Yet there was something in the stranger's stillness, something in the way his head hung low, that stirred a deep unease in Simon's soul. He hesitated, glancing up and down the empty road. No one else was in sight. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches and sending a flurry of snow across the path. Simon took a cautious step forward, then another, until he stood just a few feet from the stranger. The man's skin was as pale as the snow, his hair tangled and matted, his body thin but unmarked by injury. He did not move, did not even seem to notice Simon's presence. For a moment, Simon considered turning away, leaving the man to his fate. After all, he had his own troubles to bear, and the world was not kind to those who meddled in the affairs of strangers. But as he turned to go, a voice inside him, quiet but insistent, urged him to stop. "What if it were you?" the voice seemed to say. "What if you were the one left to freeze by the side of the road, and no one cared enough to help?" Simon's steps faltered. He looked back at the stranger, at the way his body curled in on itself, as if trying to escape the cold. Shame prickled at Simon's skin, hotter than the wind that whipped around him. He could not leave the man there, not if he wanted to call himself a man at all. With a sigh, Simon knelt beside the stranger. "Are you alive?" he asked, his voice rough with uncertainty. The man did not answer, but a faint shiver ran through his body. Simon reached out, hesitating only a moment before placing a hand on the man's shoulder. The skin was icy, but beneath it, Simon felt the faintest flutter of life. He shrugged off his own coat, the only real protection he had against the cold, and draped it over the stranger's shoulders. "Come on, friend," he said, more gently now. "You can't stay here. Let's get you up." With effort, Simon helped the man to his feet. The stranger's eyes flickered open, dark and wide, and for a moment, Simon saw something in them, a depth of sorrow, perhaps, or a gratitude too deep for words. The man leaned heavily on Simon, his legs weak from cold and hunger, but together they managed to take a few unsteady steps. Simon wrapped an arm around the stranger's waist, steadying him as they began the slow walk back toward the village. The wind howled around them, but Simon felt a strange warmth growing in his chest, a sense that, for all his failures, he had done something right. The journey back to Simon's hut was slow and arduous, the stranger's weight a constant reminder of his frailty. Simon's own body ached from the cold, his thin shirt no match for the biting wind now that he had given up his coat. Yet he pressed on, determined not to let the man falter. The stranger's silence was unsettling. He neither spoke nor looked up, his gaze fixed on the ground as if the world above held nothing for him. Simon tried to offer words of comfort, but they sounded hollow in the vast emptiness of the winter dusk. As they neared the edge of the village, the first lights began to flicker in the windows of the scattered huts. Smoke curled from chimneys, promising warmth and food within. Simon's thoughts turned to his wife Matrona and the children. He wondered how she would react to his return, coatless, empty-handed, and with a stranger in tow. He imagined her disappointment, the sharpness of her words, and the worry that would crease her brow. Still, he could not bring himself to regret his decision. There was a strange peace in the act of helping, a quiet defiance against the world's indifference. They reached the door of Simon's hut, just as the last light faded from the sky. Simon paused, steadying the stranger with one hand as he pushed open the door with the other. The warmth inside was a shock after the cold, and for a moment, both men stood blinking in the dim glow of the fire. Matrona looked up from her work, her eyes widening in surprise and then narrowing in suspicion as she took in the scene, her husband shivering in his shirt sleeves, a ragged stranger leaning heavily on his arm. Simon offered a weak smile. "Matrona, I've brought someone who needs our help." His voice was gentle, but there was a note of pleading in it, as if he hoped she would understand without further explanation. Matrona's gaze flicked from Simon to the stranger and back again. She said nothing, but her lips pressed into a thin line as she set aside her sewing and rose to her feet. The children, sensing the tension, huddled together near the stove. The stranger swayed unsteadily, and Simon guided him to the bench by the fire. "Sit here," he said softly, "and warm yourself." The man obeyed, his movements slow and deliberate, as if every gesture cost him a great effort. Matrona fetched a blanket and draped it over his shoulders, her hands brisk but not unkind. She glanced at Simon, her eyes full of questions, but he only shook his head, silently promising to explain later. As the stranger sat by the fire, the color slowly returned to his cheeks. He looked around the small room, taking in the rough-hewn table, the patched curtains, the simple comforts of a poor man's home. For the first time, he spoke a single word, barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." The sound was so soft that Simon almost missed it, but it carried a weight that filled the room with a quiet sense of grace. Matrona busied herself with supper, ladling out thin broth and cutting the last of the bread. She set a bowl before the stranger, who accepted it with trembling hands. The children watched in silence, their eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of fear. Simon sat beside his guest, offering what little comfort he could. The meal was simple, but to the stranger, it seemed a feast. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a gift. After supper, Matrona cleared the table and turned to Simon. "Who is he?" she asked quietly. Simon shook his head. "I don't know. I found him by the shrine, half frozen. I couldn't leave him there." Matrona sighed, her anger fading into resignation. "We have little enough for ourselves," she murmured, "but what's done is done." She fetched an old shirt and a pair of trousers from a chest and handed them to the stranger. "Put these on. You'll sleep by the fire tonight." The stranger changed into the dry clothes, his movements slow and careful. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, lost in thought. The children drifted off to bed, and Matrona followed soon after, leaving Simon alone with his guest. For a long time, neither man spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the wind rattling the shutters. At last, Simon broke the silence. "What is your name?" he asked gently. The stranger looked up, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Michael," he said. "My name is Michael." Simon nodded, sensing that there was more to the story, but unwilling to press. He simply said, "Rest now, Michael. You are safe here." And as the fire burned low, Simon felt a strange sense of hope flicker in his heart, a hope that, perhaps, kindness could still make a difference in a world so often ruled by hardship. The night passed slowly, the wind howling outside as if to remind those within of the world's harshness. Simon lay awake on his straw mattress, listening to the unfamiliar breathing of the stranger by the fire. He wondered about the man's past, what misfortune had left him naked and alone on the roadside, what secrets he carried in his silence. The questions circled in Simon's mind, but exhaustion finally claimed him, and he drifted into a restless sleep. Morning brought a pale, watery light through the frost-laced window. Matrona was the first to rise, her movements quiet as she stoked the embers and set water to boil. She glanced at Michael, still sleeping, his face peaceful in the glow of the fire. For a moment, her heart softened. She remembered the hunger and cold of her own childhood, the times when a stranger's kindness had meant the difference between hope and despair. She set aside a piece of bread for Michael, a silent offering to the memory of her own struggles. Simon awoke to the smell of boiling water and the sound of Matrona's gentle humming. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and looked over at Michael. The stranger stirred, blinking in the morning light, and offered a shy, grateful smile. Simon nodded in return, feeling a quiet satisfaction that the man had survived the night. Breakfast was meager, thin porridge and a crust of bread, but it was shared without complaint. Michael ate slowly, as if savoring each bite, and when he finished, he looked at Simon with a question in his eyes. "How can I help?" he asked, his voice still soft, but stronger than before. Simon considered this, then gestured to the workbench, where a pile of boots awaited repair. "If you're willing, you can help me with the boots," Simon said. "It's honest work, and there's always plenty to do." Michael nodded, rising from his place by the fire. He watched carefully as Simon demonstrated how to stitch the leather, how to shape the soles, how to make each pair strong enough to withstand the winter's worst. Michael's hands were steady, his eyes attentive, and he learned quickly, almost as if he had done this work before. As the day wore on, the two men worked side by side in companionable silence. The children watched from a distance, their curiosity slowly overcoming their shyness. Matrona moved quietly around the hut, her initial suspicion of Michael fading as she saw his willingness to help and his gentle manner with the children. By midday, the small home felt warmer, not just from the fire, but from the sense of shared purpose that had settled over them. In the afternoon, a neighbor stopped by to have a pair of boots mended. She glanced curiously at Michael, but said nothing, only nodding in approval at the quality of his stitching. Word spread quickly in the village Seaman had taken in a stranger, and the stranger was a skilled workman. Some whispered that Simon was a fool, risking what little he had for a man he barely knew. Others remembered times when they, too, had needed help, and they brought small gifts of food or firewood, gestures of solidarity in a world where survival often depended on the kindness of others. As evening approached, Simon and Michael finished their work and sat together by the fire. The children gathered at their feet, listening as Simon told stories of his own youth, tales of hardship and hope, of winters survived and summers longed for. Michael listened quietly, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames, and for the first time, he laughed, a soft, genuine sound that filled the room with warmth. Matrona watched from across the room, her heart lightened by the sight. She realized that, in opening their home to a stranger, they had gained more than an extra pair of hands. They had found a new sense of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, compassion could kindle a light that no winter wind could extinguish. As the fire burned low and the children drifted off to sleep, Simon looked at Michael and said, "You're welcome here, for as long as you need." Michael nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. In that moment, the small hut felt less like a refuge from the cold and more like a sanctuary, a place where, for a little while, the world's harshness could be held at bay by the simple power of kindness. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm, the kind that makes hardship bearable, and even the coldest winters seem less cruel. Michael proved himself not only a quick learner, but a tireless worker. He rose early, often before Simon, and set about his tasks with quiet diligence. The boots he stitched were strong and neat, his hands steady even when the wind rattled the shutters and the snow piled high against the door. Simon watched him with growing respect, grateful for the help and for the silent companionship that made the long hours pass more swiftly. Matrona, too, found her heart softening toward their guest. She noticed how Michael never took more than his share at meals, how he thanked her for every crust of bread, and how he spoke gently to the children, answering their questions with patience and a shy smile. The children, in turn, grew bold enough to sit beside him as he worked, their laughter filling the hut with a warmth that no fire could match. Even the neighbors, once wary, began to accept Michael's presence, bringing small gifts and kind words when they visited. One evening, as the family gathered around the table, Simon asked Michael about his past. The question hung in the air, heavy with curiosity and concern. Michael looked down, his fingers tracing patterns on the rough wood. "I have no family," he said quietly. "No home to return to. I have wandered for a long time." There was a sadness in his voice, a depth of sorrow that made Matrona reach out and place a comforting hand on his arm. "You have a home here, for as long as you wish," she said softly. Michael looked up, gratitude shining in his eyes, and nodded. As winter deepened, work increased. The villagers, hearing of Michael's skill, brought more boots to be mended, and Simon's small business began to thrive. For the first time in years, there was enough bread to go around, and the children's cheeks grew rosy with health. Simon felt a quiet pride in what they had built together, life forged from hardship, but made bearable by kindness and shared effort. But not all was peaceful. One bitterly cold night, a loud knock sounded at the door. Simon opened it to find a wealthy landowner, his fur coat dusted with snow, his face red from the wind. "I need boots," the man declared, thrusting a bundle of expensive leather into Simon's hands. "The best you can make. They must last a year, or I'll have your head." His tone was harsh, his eyes cold and demanding. Simon hesitated, glancing at Michael, who met his gaze with calm assurance. "We will do our best," Simon replied, though his heart pounded with anxiety. The landowner left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving behind a sense of unease that lingered long after the door was closed. Simon and Michael examined the leather, marveling at its quality and worrying over the man's threat. "We must be careful," Simon said. "This is no ordinary customer." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We will do what is right," he said simply. They set to work, measuring and cutting the leather with meticulous care. Michael's hands moved with practiced precision, his focus unwavering. As he stitched, Simon noticed a strange intensity in his eyes, as if he saw something beyond the task at hand. The hours slipped by, the only sounds, the crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of needle and thread. When the boots were finished, they were a masterpiece, strong, elegant, and perfectly fitted. Simon felt a surge of relief, but Michael's face remained solemn. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "we do not know what tomorrow will bring, no matter how well we prepare." Simon nodded, understanding more than he could say. The next day, the landowner's servant arrived to collect the boots. He brought news that chilled Simon to the bone. The landowner had died suddenly, before he could even wear the new boots. The servant requested soft slippers instead, for the burial. Michael, without a word, took the remaining leather and fashioned the slippers with the same care he had given the boots. When he handed them over, his eyes were distant, as if he were listening to a voice only he could hear. That night, as the family sat together in the quiet glow of the fire, Simon thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought Michael into their lives. He wondered at the mysteries that lingered behind the stranger's gentle smile, and at the lessons that hardship and kindness had taught them all. In the silence, he felt a sense of peace, a fragile, precious thing, born of compassion and shared struggle, and strong enough to carry them through whatever storms might come. Winter's grip tightened around the village, the days growing shorter and the nights colder. Yet, inside Simon's hut, a sense of quiet resilience took root. The family's fortunes, though still modest, had improved. There was more bread on the table, and the children's laughter rang out more often, echoing against the low ceiling beams. Michael's presence had become a comfort, his steady hands and gentle words weaving him into the fabric of their daily life. Even the neighbors, once suspicious, now spoke kindly of Simon's household, remarking on the skill of the new workmen and the warmth that seemed to radiate from their home. But beneath the surface, questions lingered. Michael remained a mystery, his past shrouded in silence. He worked hard, spoke little, and never ventured beyond the village. At night, when the others slept, he would sit by the dying embers of the fire, his gaze distant, as if searching for something lost. Simon sometimes woke to find him there, silhouetted against the orange glow, and wondered what thoughts haunted the stranger's mind. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Matrona found herself unable to sleep. She rose quietly and joined Michael by the hearth. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the wind batter the walls. At last, Matrona spoke. "You are kind to us, Michael, but you carry a sadness. Is there nothing we can do to help?" Michael looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flicker of the flames. "You have already helped more than you know," he replied softly. "Sometimes, kindness is the only light in a dark world." Matrona nodded, understanding more than words could say. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder before returning to bed, comforted by the knowledge that, whatever his secrets, Michael's heart was good. As the weeks passed, the village began to stir with rumors. Some said Michael was a fugitive, others whispered that he was a holy man in disguise. Simon paid little heed to the gossip, trusting his own judgment. He saw the way Michael treated the children, the care he took with his work, and the gratitude in his eyes. That was enough. One day, a woman from a neighboring village arrived at Simon's door, 2 small girls in tow. The girls were twins, their faces pale and solemn, one of them limping slightly. The woman explained that she had adopted them after their parents died, but she could not afford to buy them shoes for the coming spring. She had heard of Simon's skill and hoped he could help. Simon welcomed them in, offering tea and a place by the fire. Michael watched the girls with a strange intensity, his expression unreadable. When Simon measured their feet, Michael knelt beside him, his hands gentle as he soothed the frightened children. The woman told her story, how the girl's mother had died in childbirth, how she had nursed them alongside her own child, and how, despite her poverty, she could not bear to see them go hungry or cold. As the woman spoke, Michael's eyes filled with tears. He turned away, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Simon noticed but said nothing, sensing that something deep within the stranger had been touched. That night, after the woman and the girls had left, Michael sat by the fire, silent and withdrawn. Simon joined him, waiting patiently until Michael spoke. "There is much suffering in this world," Michael said at last, "but there is also great love. Sometimes, it is the love of a stranger that saves us." Simon nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle in his heart. The next day, Michael worked with renewed purpose, crafting the girls' shoes with extraordinary care. When the woman returned, she wept with gratitude, pressing a small bundle of dried herbs into Matrona's hands as payment. The girls hugged Michael, their eyes shining with joy. For a moment, the hut was filled with a lightness that seemed to banish the winter's gloom. That evening, as the family gathered for supper, Simon looked around the table and felt a deep sense of contentment. They had little, but they had each other, and the kindness they shared had brought warmth to their home. Michael smiled, a rare and beautiful sight, and for the first time, Simon sensed that the stranger had found a measure of peace. The thaw came slowly that year, the snow reluctant to release its hold on the earth. But with each passing day, the sun lingered a little longer, and the icy grip of winter began to loosen. Simon's hut, once a refuge against the cold, now filled with the hopeful sounds of spring children's laughter, the drip of melting icicles, the soft thud of boots being mended for the muddy roads ahead. Michael worked steadily, his presence as constant as the changing seasons, and the family's fortunes continued to improve. Yet, as the world outside awakened, Simon noticed a subtle change in Michael. He seemed lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He smiled more often, and the children, emboldened by his gentleness, would gather around him to hear stories or watch him work. Matrona, too, found herself drawn to Michael's quiet wisdom. She would often seek his counsel on small matters, and he always listened with patience, offering advice that was both simple and profound. One afternoon, as Simon and Michael sat together, repairing a pair of boots, Simon ventured a question that had long weighed on his mind. "Michael, you have been with us through the hardest of times. You have given much, though you had little to spare. But I still do not know who you are, or where you come from. Will you not tell me your story?" Michael paused, his needle poised above the leather. For a moment, Simon thought he might refuse. But then Michael set his work aside and looked Simon in the eye. "There are things in my past that are difficult to speak of," he began quietly. "I have wandered far, and I have known both kindness and cruelty. I have seen the best and worst of men. But what matters most is not where I have been, but what I have learned." Simon nodded, sensing the depth of Michael's words. "And what have you learned?" he asked gently. Michael's gaze grew distant, as if he were looking far beyond the walls of the hut. "I have learned that love is the only thing that endures. It is not wealth, or power, or even skill that sustains us, but the kindness we show to one another. I have been saved by the love of strangers, and I have seen lives transformed by a single act of compassion. That is why I stay, Simon. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I have found something here that is worth more than anything I have ever known." Simon was silent, moved by the honesty in Michael's voice. He thought of the long winter, of the hardships they had faced, and of the warmth that had grown in their home since Michael's arrival. He realized that, in opening their door to a stranger, they had received a gift far greater than they could have imagined. As the days grew warmer, the village prepared for the coming season. Fields were tilled, seeds were sown, and the promise of new life filled the air. Simon and Michael worked side by side, their friendship deepening with each shared task. The children flourished, their laughter a constant reminder of the joy that could be found even in the simplest moments. One evening, as the family gathered outside to watch the sunset, Matrona turned to Michael and said, "You have brought us much happiness, Michael. I hope you will stay with us always." Michael smiled, his eyes shining with gratitude. "As long as you will have me," he replied. "This will be my home." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. Simon felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In that moment, he understood that the true measure of a man was not in what he possessed, but in the love he gave and received. As spring blossomed into summer, the village came alive with color and sound. The fields ripened, the air filled with the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth, and the riverbanks echoed with the laughter of children. Simon's hut, once a place of struggle, now seemed touched by fortune. The workbench was never empty, and neighbors came from distant hamlets to have their boots mended by the skilled hands of Simon and Michael. The family's table, though still humble, was more often full, and the children grew strong and spirited. Michael's reputation spread quietly through the region. People spoke of his gentle manner, his uncanny ability to repair even the most hopeless shoes, and the way he listened to every story with the patience of a priest. Some said he was a man marked by sorrow, others whispered that he was blessed. Michael himself never spoke of his past, but his actions spoke for him, always kind, always willing to help, never asking for more than he needed. One day, a wealthy merchant arrived at the hut, his carriage drawn by 2 glossy horses. He was a large man, red-faced and impatient, and he carried with him a bundle of the finest German leather. "I have heard of your work," he said, addressing Simon but eyeing Michael. "I want boots made from this leather, boots that will last a year, no matter what. If they fail, I will see you ruined. If they succeed, I will pay you handsomely." Simon hesitated, feeling the weight of the merchant's words. The leather was worth more than he earned in a season, and the threat behind the offer was clear. He glanced at Michael, who met his gaze with calm assurance. "We will do our best," Simon replied, accepting the challenge. The merchant watched as Michael measured his feet, his eyes sharp and suspicious. Michael worked in silence, his hands steady, his face serene. When the merchant left, Simon let out a long breath. "This is dangerous work," he said quietly. "If we fail, we could lose everything." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We can only do what is right," he replied. "The rest is not in our hands." They set to work, treating the leather with reverence, cutting and stitching with the utmost care. Michael's focus was intense, as if he sensed the importance of the task. Days passed, and the boots took shape, strong, elegant, and perfectly fitted. When they were finished, Simon felt a surge of pride, but Michael's face remained solemn. The merchant returned, tried on the boots, and declared them perfect. He paid Simon generously, but his parting words were cold. "Remember, if they fail, you will answer for it." With that, he climbed into his carriage and disappeared down the road. That night, Michael sat by the fire, his eyes distant. Simon joined him, sensing a heaviness in the air. "You seem troubled," Simon said gently. Michael nodded. Sometimes, people place their faith in things that cannot last. They believe that money or power can protect them from fate, but in the end, we are all at the mercy of forces beyond our control. Simon pondered this, thinking of the merchants' threats and the uncertainty that always lingered at the edge of their lives. He realized that, despite their recent good fortune, nothing was guaranteed. Yet, as he looked around at his family's safe warm, and together he felt a quiet confidence. They had survived worse, and they would face whatever came next, side by side. The days passed, and news reached the village that the merchant had died suddenly, struck down by illness before he could even wear his new boots. His family sent for slippers to bury him in, and Michael crafted them with the same care he had given the boots. When the merchant's servant came to collect them, he thanked Simon and Michael, his voice heavy with grief. After the servant left, Simon sat in silence, reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought Michael into their lives and the lessons he had learned since. He understood now that life was fragile, and that the only thing that truly endured was the love and kindness they shared. The merchant's death cast a somber mood over the village, a reminder of how swiftly fortune could turn. Simon's family, though not wealthy, felt a quiet gratitude for the simple blessings of each day. Michael, too, seemed changed by the news. He moved with a gentler step, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding of life's uncertainties. The children sensed the shift, growing more thoughtful, their games quieter, as if they too felt the weight of the world's mysteries. One evening, as dusk settled and the fields glowed gold beneath the setting sun, Simon and Michael sat outside the hut, watching the children chase fireflies. Matrona joined them, her hands busy with mending, her face peaceful in the fading light. For a while, they spoke of small things, the coming harvest, the repairs needed on the roof, the neighbor's new calf. But beneath the surface, Simon felt a question stirring, one he had long been afraid to ask. At last, he turned to Michael. "You have been with us through many seasons, Michael. You have brought us comfort and hope. But I still wonder what brought you to that shrine on the road. What sorrow drove you to such a place?" Michael was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The air grew still, as if the world itself was waiting for his answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "There are things in my past that I cannot change. I have known loss, and I have made mistakes. I wandered for a long time, searching for forgiveness, for a place to belong. When you found me, I was at the end of my strength. I had lost faith in myself, and in the kindness of others." Simon listened, his heart heavy with empathy. He remembered his own moments of despair, the times when hope seemed out of reach. "We all have burdens to bear," he said softly, "but you are not alone anymore." Michael nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Your kindness saved me, Simon. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found. I have learned that love is the only thing that endures. It is not wealth or power that sustains us, but the compassion we show to one another." Matrona looked up from her sewing, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You have given us as much as we have given you, Michael. Perhaps more." The conversation drifted into silence, each of them lost in thought. The children's laughter faded as they came inside, and the family gathered around the table for supper. The meal was simple, but the sense of togetherness made it a feast. Michael bowed his head in gratitude, and Simon felt a deep sense of peace settle over the room. That night, as the family slept, Michael sat by the fire, staring into the embers. He thought of the journey that had brought him here, of the kindness he had received, and of the lessons he had learned. He understood now that forgiveness was not something to be found in solitude, but in the embrace of others. The warmth of the fire, the quiet breathing of the family, the gentle creak of the old hut, these were the things that gave life meaning as dawn approached. Michael rose and stepped outside, breathing in the cool, fresh air. The world was quiet, the village still asleep. He felt a sense of renewal, a hope that had once seemed impossible. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but he was no longer afraid. He had found a home, and in that home, he had found himself. Summer waned, and the first hints of autumn crept into the air. The fields turned golden, and the trees at the edge of the village began to blush with red and amber. Simon's family prepared for the coming cold, gathering firewood and storing what little grain they could spare. The hut, once a place of want, now felt secure, a haven built not of riches, but of trust and shared labor. Michael's presence was as natural as the changing seasons, and the villagers had come to accept him as one of their own. One afternoon, as Simon and Michael worked together in the yard, a group of children ran up, breathless with excitement. "There's a stranger in the village," they cried. "A woman with 2 little girls. She's asking for the shoemaker." Simon wiped his hands on his apron and exchanged a glance with Michael, who nodded, his eyes curious but calm. The woman arrived soon after, leading the girls by the hand. They were twins, identical in every way, but for a limp in the left leg of one. Their faces were solemn, their eyes wide with uncertainty. The woman introduced herself as Mary, explaining that she had taken the girls in after their parents died. "They have no one else," she said, her voice trembling. "I have little to give, but I could not let them go hungry or barefoot." Simon welcomed them inside, offering tea and a seat by the fire. Matrona brought out bread and cheese, and the girls ate quietly, their shyness slowly melting in the warmth of the room. Michael watched them with a gentle gaze, his expression softening as he listened to Mary's story. She spoke of hardship and loss, of sleepless nights and empty cupboards, but also of the fierce love that had kept her going. When Mary finished, Simon measured the girls' feet, promising to make them sturdy shoes for the coming winter. Michael knelt beside him, his hands steady and sure as he soothed the girls' fears. "You are safe here," he told them, his voice as warm as the fire. The girls smiled, their trust growing with each kind word. Over the next few days, Michael worked tirelessly on the shoes, pouring all his skill and care into every stitch. The girls visited often, watching in fascination as the leather took shape. They grew bolder, asking questions and sharing stories of their own. Michael listened patiently, his laughter ringing out like music in the small hut. When the shoes were finished, Mary wept with gratitude. "You have given us more than you know," she said, pressing Simon's hands in thanks. Michael smiled, his heart full. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the power of a simple act of kindness. That evening, after Mary and the girls had left, Simon and Michael sat together in the quiet. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls. Simon spoke first, his voice thoughtful. "It seems that every time we give, we receive even more in return. I used to think that a man's worth was measured by what he could earn or own, but now I see it is measured by the love he gives." Michael nodded, his eyes shining in the firelight. "Love is the only thing that endures," he said softly. "It is the thread that binds us all, the light that guides us through the darkness." As the night deepened, Simon felt a profound sense of peace. The world outside was still uncertain, the future unknown, but within the walls of the small hut, there was warmth and hope, and the quiet certainty that, whatever came, they would face it together. The days grew shorter, and the crisp air of autumn sharpened into the first chill of winter. Simon's family, now well prepared, faced the season with a sense of unity and quiet strength. The children, bundled in patched coats, played in the yard while Matrona busied herself with the last of the harvest. Michael, ever steady, worked at the bench, his hands shaping leather with a skill that seemed almost otherworldly. The hut, once a place of struggle, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where kindness and hard work had transformed hardship into hope. One evening, as the family gathered around the fire, Michael shared a story from his wandering days. His voice was soft, the flames casting flickering shadows across his face. "There was a time," he began, "when I believed I was alone in the world. I wandered from village to village, never staying long, always searching for something I could not name. I saw much suffering, but also much goodness. It was the kindness of strangers that kept me alive, even when I had nothing to offer in return." The children listened, wide-eyed, as Michael spoke of distant places and the people he had met, farmers who shared their bread, widows who offered shelter, children who gave him a smile when he needed it most. "I learned," Michael said, "that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Sometimes, it is the only thing that can." Simon nodded, understanding the truth in Michael's words. He thought of the day he had found Michael by the shrine, cold and alone, and how that single act of compassion had changed the course of their lives. He realized that, in helping Michael, he had helped himself and his family as well. As the fire burned low, Matrona spoke. "We have all suffered, in our own ways, but together, we have found something worth holding on to. I am grateful for every day we share, for every meal, every laugh, every moment of peace." Michael smiled, his eyes shining with gratitude. "It is love that sustains us," he said quietly. "Not just the love of family, but the love we show to strangers, to those in need. That is what gives life meaning." The conversation drifted into silence, each of them lost in thought. The children fell asleep by the fire, their faces peaceful in the warm glow. Simon and Matrona sat together, their hands entwined, feeling the quiet strength that came from facing life's challenges side by side. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters and sending a flurry of snow against the door. But inside the hut, there was warmth and light, a testament to the power of kindness and the enduring strength of love. As the night deepened, Michael sat alone by the fire, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He knew that his time with Simon's family had changed him, had healed wounds he thought would never mend. He understood now that forgiveness and redemption were not found in solitude, but in the embrace of others. He whispered a silent prayer of thanks, not just for the shelter and food, but for the love that had welcomed him in from the cold. He knew that, whatever the future held, he would carry this lesson with him always, that what men live by is not bread alone, but the love and compassion they share. The first heavy snows arrived, blanketing the village in white and muffling every sound. Life slowed, and the world outside seemed to disappear beneath the drifts. Inside Simon's hut, the family drew closer, their days marked by simple routines, mending, cooking, telling stories by the fire. Michael's presence was now as familiar as the ticking of the old clock on the shelf. He had become a brother to Simon, a gentle uncle to the children, and a quiet comfort to Matrona. One evening, as the wind howled and the windows rattled, a knock sounded at the door. Simon opened it to find Mary, the woman who had adopted the twins, standing on the threshold with the girls. Their cheeks were red from the cold, but their eyes were bright. "We came to thank you," Mary said, her voice trembling with emotion. "The shoes you made have kept the girls warm and safe. I wanted you to know how much your kindness has meant to us." Simon welcomed them in, and Matrona quickly set out tea and bread. The girls ran to Michael, hugging him tightly. He knelt to their level, his face alight with joy. "You are always welcome here," he told them, and the girls beamed as they sat together. Mary shared more of her story. She spoke of the loneliness she had felt after losing her own child, and how caring for the twins had given her life new purpose. "I thought I was saving them," she said softly, "but in truth, they saved me. Love is a strange thing. It finds us when we least expect it, and it changes everything." Michael listened intently, his eyes shining with understanding. "It is love that gives us strength," he said. "It is what binds us together, even when the world seems cold and unforgiving." The evening passed in laughter and gentle conversation. The children played by the fire, their voices bright against the hush of the snow outside. Simon felt a deep sense of contentment. knowing that their small acts of kindness had rippled outward, touching lives beyond their own. After Mary and the girls left, Michael sat quietly, lost in thought. Simon joined him, sensing that something weighed on his friend's mind. "You have given much, Michael," Simon said, "but you still carry a sadness. Is there something you wish to share?" Michael looked at Simon, his expression solemn. "There is a truth I have carried for a long time," he began. "A lesson I was sent to learn, and one I wish to share with you. I have seen much suffering, but I have also seen the power of love to heal and transform. It is not enough to care for ourselves alone. We must care for one another, for it is in giving that we truly live." Simon nodded, feeling the weight of Michael's words settle in his heart. He understood now that the greatest gift they had received was not food or shelter, but the love that had grown between them, a love that had turned strangers into family, and hardship into hope. As the fire burned low and the night deepened, Simon felt a quiet peace. He knew that, whatever storms might come, they would face them together, bound by the simple, enduring truth that what men live by is love. The long winter finally began to loosen its hold, and the first hints of spring crept into the air. The snow melted in slow silvery streams, and the earth beneath revealed itself once more. Simon's family, like the village itself, emerged from the season of hardship with a renewed sense of hope. The children played outside again, their laughter echoing across the thawing fields, and Matrona opened the windows to let in the fresh, cool breeze. Life, it seemed, was beginning anew. Yet, as the world awakened, Michael grew quieter. He spent more time alone, walking the edge of the woods, or sitting by the river, lost in thought. Simon noticed, and one evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold, he joined Michael by the water's edge. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the gentle rush of the stream. At last, Simon spoke. "You have brought us so much, Michael. I cannot imagine our lives without you, but I sense that you are troubled. Is there something you wish to tell me?" Michael looked at Simon, his eyes deep and calm. "There is a truth I have carried with me, Simon. I was not always as you see me now. I was sent into this world to learn what men live by. I have wandered, suffered, and been shown great kindness. I have seen that love is the force that sustains us all." Simon listened, his heart open. "You have taught us more than you know, Michael. Your presence has changed our lives." Michael smiled, a gentle sadness in his expression. "It is time for me to move on, Simon. My journey is not yet finished. There are others who need what you have given me: shelter, kindness, and a place to belong. But I will never forget what I have found here." Simon felt a pang of sorrow, but also a deep gratitude. "You will always have a home with us, Michael. Wherever you go, you are part of our family." That night, Michael shared a final meal with Simon's family. The children clung to him, and Matrona wept quietly, her tears a mixture of sadness and joy. Michael spoke to each of them, offering words of comfort and hope. "Remember," he said, "it is not what you possess that matters, but the love you give. That is what endures." As dawn broke, Michael gathered his few belongings and prepared to leave. Simon walked with him to the edge of the village, the sky brightening with the promise of a new day. They embraced, and Michael whispered, "Thank you, Simon, for everything." Simon watched as Michael walked away, his figure growing smaller against the vast, waking world. He felt a sense of loss, but also a profound peace. He knew that Michael's journey would touch others, just as it had touched them. Back at the hut, Simon's family gathered together, their hearts full. They understood now, more than ever, that what men live by is not bread alone, but the love and kindness they share. And as the sun rose higher, filling the world with light, they faced the future with hope, knowing that the lessons of compassion and generosity would guide them, no matter what lay ahead. The seasons turned once more, and life in the village continued its quiet, steady rhythm. Simon's family, though missing Michael's gentle presence, found themselves changed in ways they could not have imagined. The lessons he had brought lingered in their hearts, shaping their days and the choices they made. Simon worked with renewed purpose, his hands steady and sure. But it was the warmth in his voice and the kindness in his eyes that the villagers noticed most. Matrona, too, became known for her generosity, always ready with a loaf of bread or a comforting word for those in need. The children, growing stronger with each passing year, carried Michael's stories with them, sharing them with friends and neighbors. They spoke of the stranger who had come to their door in the dead of winter, and how their family had been transformed by a simple act of compassion. The tale spread through the village and beyond, a quiet reminder that even the smallest kindness could change the course of a life. As time passed, Simon often found himself reflecting on the years since Michael's arrival. He remembered the hardships they had faced, the hunger, the cold, the uncertainty of each new day. But more than that, he remembered the moments of grace, the laughter around the table, the warmth of shared labor, the peace that came from knowing they were not alone. He understood now that these were the true riches of life, treasures that could not be measured in coins or possessions. One spring morning, as Simon walked through the village, he saw a traveler resting by the old shrine at the crossroads. The man looked weary, his clothes threadbare, his eyes filled with longing. Without hesitation, Simon approached him, offering a smile and a place to rest. "Come with me," he said. "There is warmth and food at my home." The traveler's face lit up with gratitude, and together they walked the familiar path back to the hut. That evening, as the family gathered around the fire, Simon shared the story of Michael once more. He spoke of the lessons they had learned, the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the truth that what men live by is not what they take, but what they give. The children listened, their eyes shining, and Matrona reached for Simon's hand, her heart full. Outside, the world was vast and uncertain, but within the walls of their humble home, there was light and hope. Simon knew that Michael's journey had not truly ended, for the love he had shared continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways unseen. And as the fire burned low and the stars appeared in the night sky, Simon whispered a silent prayer of thanks for Michael, for his family, and for the simple, enduring truth that had changed them all. If this story has touched your heart or made you reflect on the quiet power of kindness, consider joining us for more journeys into the hidden corners of the human spirit. Share your thoughts below, or tell us about a moment when compassion changed your life. Subscribe to Unseen Anthology to discover more stories that remind us of the strength found in love, generosity, and the simple acts that bind us together. The most important stories are often the ones that are hardest to tell and, sometimes, the ones we need to hear most.